I left my man for a scammer now. My ex owns a business, and the scammer's in jail. That's literally my life right now, and I still can't believe I'm saying those words out loud. My name's LaTanya. I'm 28, and I swear this wasn't how things were supposed to go down. 5 years. That's how long Michael and I were together before everything fell apart. We met at my cousin's barbecue when I was 23, fresh out of community college with my associate's degree in business administration. Michael was there helping set up the sound system, always the helpful type, that man. Quiet, steady, responsible Michael with his perfectly ironed button-ups and his 5-year plans. The first couple years were good, can't lie about that. We moved into this little 2-bedroom apartment in the east side of town. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Michael worked at this IT company downtown, always talking about servers and networks and stuff I tuned out. I was bouncing between retail jobs, trying to find something that didn't make me want to claw my eyes out every morning. But that's when things started changing. Michael was always at work, putting in extra hours, volunteering for weekend projects. Building experience, he kept saying. Investing in our future. Meanwhile, I'm at home scrolling through Instagram, seeing everyone else living their best lives while I'm eating microwave dinners waiting for my man to come home. And when he did come home, all he talked about was this business idea he had. Some tech support thing for small businesses. He'd go on and on about market research and startup costs, while I'm thinking about the vacation we haven't taken in 2 years. We need to save, he'd say whenever I brought up doing something fun. This business is going to change everything for us. That's when the fights started. Not shouting matches or anything dramatic, Michael wasn't the type. Just these tense, quiet arguments about money. He'd get that look on his face when I'd come home with shopping bags. We agreed on a budget, LaTanya, he'd say in that calm voice that drove me crazy. Like he was my financial advisor instead of my man. I started feeling invisible in my own relationship. Michael was physically there, but his mind was always on his precious business plan. Date nights turned into him working on his laptop while I watched Netflix alone. Even in bed, he'd fall asleep instantly after working 12-hour days while I'm wide awake, feeling like I'm living with a roommate, not a boyfriend. That's when Devon slid into my DMs. I know how this sounds, but y'all don't understand what it's like to suddenly feel seen after being a ghost in your own relationship. His profile was all luxury popping bottles at clubs, designer clothes, vacation pics in Miami. He commented on one of my selfies, the one Michael didn't even like, saying I was too fine to be looking sad in these eyes. I told myself I was just being friendly when I responded. Just some harmless attention to fill the emptiness Michael left. Devon asked questions about meme dreams, what made me laugh, what I wanted from life, all the things Michael used to ask before his business obsession. And I found myself waiting for Devon's messages, checking my phone constantly, feeling that excitement I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Michael's saving every penny, skipping lunch at work, driving his car till the check engine light became a permanent fixture on the dash. I'd bring up Devon's lifestyle and not mentioning him by name, just saying things like, my friend's boyfriend takes her to these amazing restaurants downtown. And Michael would nod absently and say, that's nice, but we're investing in something bigger than fancy dinners. I started hiding my phone, making excuses to step outside for fresh air when Devon called, telling Michael I was meeting girlfriends when I was really meeting Devon for drinks. The guilt was there, sure, but it was drowned out by how alive I felt when Devon looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. 3 months of this double life and I was exhausted but addicted to the thrill. Devon kept asking when I was going to leave Michael, saying we could be together for real, showing me pictures of the condo he said we could live in. Michael, meanwhile, finally got approval for a small business loan, all excited about finding a location for his office. He tried to celebrate with me, but all I could think about was Devon's text burning in my pocket. You deserve a man who puts you first, not his business. That night, watching Michael fall asleep with his business plan printouts scattered across our bed, I made my decision. I convinced myself Michael would be better off without me, any free to pursue his boring business dreams while I finally got to live. I had no idea I was about to blow up my entire life, or that I'd be sitting here a year later broke and alone. watching Michael's success from the sidelines while my upgrade writes me letters from behind bars. But that part comes later. 2 weeks later, I did it. I broke Michael's heart on a Tuesday evening when he came home with takeout and news about finding an affordable office space. The look on his face when I told him I was leaving, I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. Confusion, then disbelief, then this awful, quiet pain. He just stood there, takeout bags dropping to the floor, asking me why, over and over like a broken record. I fed him some lines about growing apart and needing to find myself. I didn't have the decency to tell him about Devon. Not then. Michael sat on our couch, the one he paid for, with his head in his hands while I packed my things. He didn't yell, didn't curse me out, just asked in this hollow voice if there was someone else. I lied straight to his face and said no. Something in his eyes told me he knew better, but he just nodded and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, LaTanya." Devon picked me up 2 blocks away. I cried in his car, and he held me, telling me I was brave, that I deserved happiness, that Michael was holding me back. By the time we reached his place, not the luxury condo from his Instagram, but a decent apartment on the north side, I'd convinced myself I'd made the right choice. Devon popped champagne that night, told me we were celebrating the first day of my real life. For a while, it felt like he was right. Devon was everything Michael wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, lavish, with compliments and attention. We went out to clubs, restaurants, weekend trips to Atlantic City. I'd post pictures, making sure mutual friends would see, secretly hoping Michael would notice how happy I looked, how much better off I was without him. My girls were skeptical from jump. Shanice straight up asked if I'd lost my mind, leaving stable Michael for some guy I barely knew. Keisha warned me that Devon's lifestyle didn't add up nice clothes and bottle service, but a mid-range apartment and no clear job. I brushed them off, told them they were jealous, that they didn't understand what real passion felt like. A month in, Michael texted to say he'd left some of my things in a box by my mom's place. No drama, no begging me to come back, just courtesy. It annoyed me how dignified he was being. Meanwhile, I was starting to notice little things about Devon: how vague he was about his business deals, how he'd take calls in another room, how his credit card got declined twice but he always had cash. But I ignored those little warning bells because Michael had already signed the lease on his small office space, according to my cousin who ran into him. He was moving on with his life plan like I was just a detour, not a destination, and something about that made me double down on making things work with Devon, even when the first real red flag appeared. He asked to borrow $800 for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. Just a short-term loan, he promised. Money I'd get back tenfold. 3 months into living with Devon, I was starting to see cracks in the fantasy. The loan I gave him turned into another, then another. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones, as his business deals always seemed to be just around the corner from paying off big. He'd show me screenshots of bank accounts with huge balances, but somehow there was always some issue with accessing the funds. Meanwhile, my savings were dwindling, and I'd lost my job at the mall after Devon convinced me to call out too many times for our spontaneous day trips. "You're too smart for retail anyway," he'd say. "Once this next deal closes, you won't have to work unless you want to." I was still posting the highlight reel on social media, but the glamorous dates were getting fewer and farther between. Then came the night I found the burner phones in his gym bag. 3 of them, plus IDs with different names but Devon's picture. When I confronted him, he had an explanation ready: something about privacy from corporate espionage in his consulting business. He got angry when I pushed for details, accused me of not trusting him, of being just like all the other females who didn't understand his hustle. I'd never seen that side of him before: cold, calculating, with this edge to his voice that made me step back. But then he'd switch instantly, pulling me close, telling me he was sorry, he was just stressed about money. He even cried, saying he was afraid of losing me. And I, fool that I was, comforted him and apologized for doubting him. That same week, I ran into Michael's cousin at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her because I was so focused on stretching my last $50 until Devon's big payday. She mentioned that Michael's business was taking off. He'd hired 2 employees and was looking to expand already. She showed me the company website on her phone, all professional with testimonials from happy clients. I felt this weird mix of pride and regret seeing his dream becoming real without me in the picture. By month 4, Devon had borrowed nearly $7,000 from Memi entire savings, plus maxed out credit cards. He'd started suggesting I ask my family for loans. When I hesitated, he'd remind me of all he'd done for me, how he'd rescued me from my boring life with Michael. The emotional manipulation was working. I actually called my mom to ask for money, making up a story about professional development courses. But Mom saw through it. "This new man is using you, LaTanya," she said bluntly. "Michael called last week to make sure I got your winter clothes he dropped off. Still looking out for you even after what you did. You chose wrong, baby girl." I hung up on her, furious and embarrassed because deep down I was starting to think she might be right. That night, I went through Devon's laptop while he was in the shower and found emails confirming my worst fears conversations with other women that mirrored exactly how he'd approached me. The same compliments, the same promises, the same investment opportunities. Some of these conversations were happening right now, not from the past. I was just one of many marks in his ongoing scam. I didn't confront Devon immediately after finding those emails. Something told me to be smart for once, to watch and gather information instead of reacting. For 2 weeks, I played the devoted girlfriend while secretly documenting everything, taking pictures of the fake IDs, copying emails, recording conversations when he didn't realize. I was finally seeing the full picture of the man I'd thrown away my relationship for, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Devon wasn't just a player. He was a professional con artist with multiple identities and victims across 3 states. The business trips he took were to meet other women he was scamming. Some had given him much more than I had done. Woman had apparently remortgaged her house. The more I discovered, the more terrified I became, but also the more determined to not be just another sucker in his game. I was planning my exit strategy when fate intervened in the form of 2 police detectives at our door. They had questions about Davon Williams, aka Devin Washington, aka David Warner. The look on Davon's face when he realized I was watching this encounter from the hallway, a mixture of panic and calculation, told me everything. He tried to bolt past the officers but didn't make it out of the building. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters called it a romance scam ring that had defrauded women of over $300,000 collectively. My name was kept out of the papers, but everyone who knew me knew I was one of the victims. The detectives were sympathetic but direct. I'd been played by a professional. At least the documentation I'd gathered helped strengthen their case, they said, as if that was supposed to make me feel better about my stupidity. With Devon in custody and frozen out of the apartment lease he'd somehow put in my name, I had nowhere to go but my mother's couch. The humiliation was complete when she didn't even say, "I told you so," just hugged me and helped me sort through the financial wreckage of my life. Nearly $15,000 in debt, credit score in the toilet, and a reputation as the woman dumb enough to leave a good man for a criminal. Speaking of Michael, his business was becoming something of a local success story. A friend showed me a write-up in the business section of our local paper. Young entrepreneur fills vital tech niche for small businesses. There he was, standing in front of his company logo, looking more confident than I'd ever seen him. The article mentioned he was expanding to a larger office space and had 5 employees now. No mention of a personal life, but my friend delicately mentioned he'd been seeing someone for a few months. I hit rock bottom the day I had to apply for a job at the same mall I'd quit, but at a lower-end store with lower pay. As I filled out the application, I couldn't help but think about the parallel lives unfolding, Michael rising while I was scrambling to rebuild from nothing. The man I dismissed as boring and unambitious was now successful, while the exciting man who'd promised me the world was sitting in a cell awaiting trial. That night, I did something I knew was a bad idea. I texted Michael, just a simple "Congratulations on your business success. You deserve it." I stared at those 3 dots appearing and disappearing for what felt like forever before his reply came through. "Thank you, LaTanya. I hope you're doing well." Polite, distant, final. There was no invitation to reconnect, no hint of lingering feelings, just courtesy from a man who had moved on completely. The final blow came 6 months after Devon's arrest. I was subpoenaed to testify at his trial, forced to publicly admit how completely I'd fallen for his scam. Sitting on that witness stand, recounting how I'd left my stable relationship, drained my savings, and ignored every warning sign was the most humiliating experience of my life. Devon sat there smirking occasionally, like this was all just a minor inconvenience in his career of deception. The prosecutor asked if I'd had any indication of his true character, and I had to admit that everyone around me had tried to warn me, friends, my family, even my own instincts that I deliberately silenced. "And why didn't you listen to these warnings?" she asked. The only honest answer was that I'd been so determined to prove I hadn't made a mistake leaving Michael that I'd ignored reality. But I couldn't say that in court, so I just mumbled something about being manipulated, which was also true. Devon was sentenced to 8 years for fraud and identity theft. The judge ordered restitution to his victims, but everyone knew we'd never see that money. As I left the courthouse, a woman stopped me, another victim. It turned out she'd lost over $50,000 to him, her entire retirement fund. Somehow, hearing her story made me feel both less alone and even more foolish. At least I was young enough to rebuild. She was in her 60s. Meanwhile, Michael's business had grown enough to be featured in a regional business magazine as one of the startups to watch. The profile included a photo of him with his team and his new girlfriend, now apparently his business partner as well. She was beautiful in an understated way, with degrees in business and computer science. They'd met at a tech conference, according to the article. They looked happy, solid, like they made sense together. I found myself driving past his new, expanded office one evening, slowing down to see the lit windows, people still working inside, the sign above the door his dream made physical. I remembered how I'd rolled my eyes when he'd first sketched that logo, how I'd complained about his long hours and saving habits. Now those same qualities had built him something real. While I was working 2 jobs to slowly dig out of debt, my credit score so bad I couldn't even lease a decent car. My mother, seeing me spiral into depression, finally sat me down for the talk I'd been avoiding. "Baby girl, you need to accept what happened and move forward," she said. "You made choices. They had consequences. That's life." When I tried to blame Devon for everything, she shook her head. "He's a criminal who belongs in jail, no doubt. But you chose to leave a good man before Devon ever came along. Own that part, at least." But ownership isn't my strong suit, as this whole mess proves. It's easier to see myself as a victim of circumstance, of Devon's manipulation, of Michael's emotional neglect. Easier than admitting I was greedy for a life that looked good on Instagram instead of one that was slowly building towards something real. Easier than acknowledging that the boring stability I rejected is exactly what I'm desperate for now. I saw Michael in person only once after everything fell apart. I was working at the coffee shop near his office, my second job, when he came in with his team after some company milestone. He noticed me behind the counter, and there was this moment of genuine surprise before his expression settled into something neutral. He nodded politely, ordered his usual black coffee, and left a generous tip. His business partner, girlfriend, gave me a curious look, but didn't ask questions. They left holding hands, laughing about something I couldn't hear. And here I am now, a year after blowing up my life, watching Michael's company expand to a second location through social media updates I shouldn't still be checking. Devon writes me letters from prison, sometimes still trying to run games, suggesting we could team up when he gets out. I throw them away now. Too late to be smart about him, but maybe not too late to be smart about my future. I'm taking night classes in medical billing, nothing glamorous, but practical. Steady. The kind of path Michael would approve of, though that shouldn't matter anymore. People ask if I regret leaving Michael for a scammer. The truth is more complicated than a simple yes. I regret the consequences, the humiliation, the financial disaster. But there was something broken in me, long before Devon came along, this restlessness, this belief that I deserved more without being willing to work for it. Michael deserved someone who saw his quiet determination as strength, not weakness. I'm still working on becoming someone who could recognize that value. Too late for us, but maybe not too late for me.